Listen carefully, Ellen. I framed Smith down to the last millimeter. The FBI already has fake evidence in their hands. If you keep clinging to him, I'll submit it. He'll rot in federal prison for at least 20 years for money laundering. New York at night was beautiful, like a glittering gemstone, but cold and unforgiving. Outside, the temperature had dropped to 25 degrees Fahrenheit, -4 degrees Celsius, the wind howling in violent gusts between the skyscrapers. But inside the penthouse on the 55th floor in the heart of Manhattan, the air was warm and saturated with the smell of money. Smith stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, gently swirling a $500 bottle of Cristal champagne in his hand. He looked down at the dark mass of Central Park and the brilliant golden lights of Fifth Avenue. At 35 years old, Smith had everything an American man could dream of: power, wealth, and recognition. "Ellen, come look at this," Smith called out to his wife, his voice filled with excitement. Ellen, a music teacher with a classic, quiet beauty, stepped out of the bedroom. She wore a simple silk dress, a sharp contrast to the luxury of the room. Smith wrapped an arm around his wife's waist and pointed toward the distant harbor. "Do you see that? I wired the down payment this afternoon. A 60-foot yacht. We finally made it to the top of the world, just like I promised you the day we left the Bronx slums." He turned around and picked up the latest issue of Forbes magazine from the glass table, where his face was prominently featured on the cover beneath the headline, "The New Midas King of Wall Street." Ellen smiled, but the smile never reached her eyes. She looked at the glass in her husband's hand and let out a quiet sigh. "Smith, do we really need a yacht? You work 80 hours a week. I just need you to have dinner at home." Smith laughed loudly, the sound echoing through the massive room that felt emotionally hollow. "My love, this is America. If you don't move forward, you get crushed. Don't worry, once the merger deal closes tomorrow, I'll take you to the Bahamas." Ellen lowered her gaze. She realized that the ambitious yet warm man she had married was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone obsessed with numbers. The next morning, 8 a.m., the Manhattan sky was a dull gray, signaling an approaching snowstorm. Smith walked into the corporate headquarters with the confidence of a man in control. Employees bowed their heads as he passed, their eyes filled with admiration mixed with fear. The moment he entered his office, Brooke, the vice president and also Smith's closest friend for the past 10 years, was already waiting. Brooke wore a handmade Italian suit, a permanent smile on his lips, but his eyes were ice cold. "Morning, brother. Big day today. Are you ready?" "Always ready, Brooke. Let's throw a party tonight," Smith replied, taking off his coat and hanging it on the rack. Bang! The glass office doors burst open violently. "FBI, everyone freeze. No one touch the keyboards." Dozens of agents in bulletproof vests with bright yellow FBI letters stormed in like a flood. Screams and heavy footsteps threw the entire floor into chaos. Smith stood frozen. "What the hell is this? You've got the wrong guy." A tall agent stepped forward, yanked Smith's arms behind his back, and snapped the handcuffs shut. The cold metallic click echoed sharply. "Mr. Smith, you are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud involving $20 million and money laundering through shell companies." "What? This is insane!" Smith shouted, desperately looking for help. "Brooke, say something! Explain this to them!" But Brooke was not panicking. He stood with his arms crossed, calmly pulling a thick stack of documents from his briefcase and handing them to the FBI commander. "These are all the records of money transfers into Smith's personal accounts that I've collected. His signature is on the last page. I'm very sorry. I tried to warn him, but his greed was too great." Smith stared at the documents. His signature was there, identical in every stroke, a forgery so perfect it was terrifying. He looked up at Brooke's crooked smile and understood everything. This was not an arrest. This was an execution. 24 hours later, Smith was released on bail after a public defender reluctantly completed the paperwork, but this freedom was temporary. His bank accounts were frozen, his credit cards canceled, his car impounded. He had to walk home through freezing sleet, still wearing the wrinkled suit from the day before. Headlines were everywhere: billionaire or con artist. The penthouse door opened, but there was no smell of food, no warm light. It was pitch dark and colder than the street outside. "Ellen?" Smith called out, his voice hoarse. No answer. The furniture was gone, the paintings, the decorations, her clothes, everything had vanished. Smith walked into the dining room. On the 8-foot mahogany table, only 2 things remained: his wedding ring and a divorce paper already signed with Ellen's name. His trembling hand grabbed the landline phone, the only thing that hadn't been cut, and dialed Ellen's number. The phone rang for a long time before someone finally picked up. "Ellen, where are you? Listen to me. I was set up. Brooke, he—" On the other end, Ellen's voice sounded cold and distant, like that of a stranger. "Enough, Smith. I've seen the news. I can't live with a loser who's about to go to prison. Do you think I married you for love? Wake up." What did you just say?" Smith whispered, stunned. "Brooke promised to give me a better life, the one you just lost. Don't look for me again. Sign the papers." Beep, beep, beep. The phone slipped from Smith's hand. The pain did not come from losing $20 million. The pain came from the fatal stab straight into his heart. The woman he loved most, the one he trusted completely, had abandoned him the moment the ship went down, running toward the man who had stabbed him in the back. Smith let out a scream of agony like a wounded animal and hurled the crystal glass against the wall, shattering it into pieces. In the darkness of the now empty $1-million home, a demon of hatred began to awaken in Smith's eyes. The fall from millionaire to homeless man happened faster and more brutally than any nightmare Smith had ever imagined. Just 3 days after Ellen left, the bank executed its foreclosure rights. Smith was thrown out of the skyscraper he once owned, penniless, with nothing but a wrinkled Italian suit and expensive leather shoes, items now useless against the bone-cutting cold of a New York winter. He drifted north into the Bronx, where dark, filthy alleys bore no resemblance to Manhattan's glamorous lights. The temperature dropped to 10 degrees Fahrenheit, or -12 degrees Celsius. Snow-filled winds lashed Smith's face like razor blades, slicing through the thin silk lining of his suit and gnawing straight into his bones. On the first night, Smith curled up in an alley behind a magazine shop. He found a large discarded refrigerator cardboard box and dragged it into the most wind-sheltered corner to use as a home. The stench of mold, urine, and garbage hit his nose, but the numbing cold left him too weak to vomit. He realized that a CEO title or a Harvard master's degree meant nothing here. Hunger began torturing him on the second day. His stomach twisted violently. Smith staggered toward a trash bin behind a famous bagel shop. His eyes lit up when he spotted half of a sesame bagel mixed among dirty coffee cups and wrappers. As he reached for it, a larger homeless man with a thick beard lunged forward and shoved Smith hard onto the freezing ground. "Get lost! This is my territory," the man growled, snatching the bagel and stuffing it into his mouth, chewing greedily. Smith lay sprawled on the icy pavement, blood seeping from a scrape on his hand. A well-dressed young couple walked past. By instinct, Smith raised his hand weakly. "Please, help me." The man looked at Smith with contempt and pulled his girlfriend along faster. "Don't look at him, babe. Just another lazy junkie. In this country, if you don't have money, you're just trash." Those words hurt more than hunger itself. No money, no respect. The brutal truth of American society was laid bare before Smith's eyes. He curled up inside the torn cardboard box, tears freezing on his cheeks, tasting the bitterness of the very bottom of society for the first time. By the 10th night, Smith's limit of endurance had hit absolute bottom. The gnawing hunger had shifted into numbness, and a high fever sent his thoughts spinning. In the middle of a blizzard burying the city, the idea of suicide began to take shape in Smith's mind. He thought about the rumbling tracks of the number 6 subway line running beneath the ground. Just one step, and all the pain, cold, and humiliation would end. Smith wandered aimlessly along the frozen sidewalk, his numb legs carrying him toward the station. Suddenly, his steps halted in front of the glass display of an electronics store on 3rd Avenue. Dozens of flat-screen televisions were broadcasting the same entertainment news channel. On the brightly colored screens was the scene of New York's most luxurious winter charity gala. Gentlemen in glossy black tuxedos and ladies in sparkling evening gowns raised their glasses in celebration. Then the camera zoomed in on the centerpiece couple of the night. It was Brooke. He was smiling radiantly, holding a wine glass, carrying himself with the composed authority of a newly crowned CEO who had just seized power. But what made Smith stop breathing was the woman standing beside him. It was Ellen. She was wearing an emerald green evening gown, the color Smith had once told her suited her best. Though a trace of sadness flickered across her face, she still stood there, next to the man who had destroyed her husband. As reporters interviewed them, Brooke casually wrapped his arm tightly around Ellen's waist, pulling her close. Ellen did not resist. She merely lowered her head slightly. The headline scrolling across the screen stabbed into Smith's eyes like a blade. Phoenix Group's new CEO makes public appearance with girlfriend, New York's new golden couple. In that moment, the bone-deep cold vanished from Smith's body. In its place, a raging fire erupted violently from his chest. His blood felt as if it were boiling again. "Are you drinking wine over my corpse? Do you think I'm already dead?" Smith ground his teeth, his fingernails digging deep into his palms until blood surfaced. The image of Brooke's arm around Ellen's waist killed the weak man inside Smith. He turned his back on the direction of the subway station. He could not die. Dying now would mean letting them win. He had to live, had to go back there and drag them down to hell, even if he had to sell his soul to the devil. The next morning, as the first weak rays of sunlight touched the city, Smith did not go begging for food anymore. He walked straight to the New York Public Library on 5th Avenue. It was the only place in the city that offered heating and free computers to anyone. Smith stepped inside, shaking the snow from his shoulders, his eyes burning with the awakening fire of a predator. The New York Public Library became Smith's new office. Every day, he was the first to line up when the doors opened at 10 a.m. and the last to leave when security politely ushered people out at 6 p.m. With the mind of a former top-tiered chief financial officer, it didn't take Smith long to recognize the instability of the market following his own scandal. He threw himself into studying candlestick charts and high-frequency trading data. After 3 relentless weeks of eating cheap bread and drinking from public water fountains, Smith found the Holy Grail, a microscopic loophole in the automatic order-matching algorithms of major exchanges. He wrote a new piece of code, an algorithm capable of predicting and executing trades 0.05 seconds faster than the market. He named it the Ghost. To run it and generate massive profits, he needed powerful server infrastructure and minimum regulatory capital. The number he needed was $150,000 in seed money. Smith used the spare change he had begged for to buy a disposable razor, went into the library restroom, and shaved off his scraggly beard. He smoothed his hair, straightened the tie on his worn-out suit, and tried to restore the most professional business appearance he could manage. He made his way to Silicon Alley, the cluster of fintech companies in Manhattan. At a pitch meeting with a mid-sized venture capital fund, Smith's sharp intellect completely won over the partners. "Impressive. This algorithm could change the game," the fund's director nodded, ambition gleaming in his eyes. "We're willing to invest $200,000 for the first round." Smith's heart pounded. A door of hope had just cracked open, but at that very moment, the secretary entered, whispered something into the director's ear, and placed a sheet of paper on the table. It was the result of a background check. The director's expression changed instantly. He slammed the paper onto the table, his voice turning icy. "Smith, the guy who embezzled $20 million and was just released on bail, are you kidding me?" "That's a misunderstanding. I was set up. This algorithm will prove my capability," Smith rushed to explain. "On Wall Street, reputation is everything. We don't invest in criminals. Security, throw him out." Smith was dragged by two security guards and dumped onto the freezing stone steps outside. The glass doors slammed shut in front of him. No one cared how brilliant his idea was. With a criminal record, every bank and investment fund door in America was permanently closed to Smith. Smith sat in a cheap 24-hour diner on the edge of Hell's Kitchen, staring blankly ahead. In front of him was a cold, watery black coffee costing $1.50, the only thing he could afford with the last coins scraped from his pocket. Outside, snow continued to fall, burying the fragile hope he had just found. Suddenly, a man in his early 60s entered the diner, wearing a neatly tailored gray suit and carrying a crocodile leather briefcase. He looked completely out of place among the laborers and addicts around him. He walked straight to Smith's table, pulled out a chair, and sat down without asking. "Mr. Smith, I'm Arthur Penhaligon, legal counsel," the man said, placing his business card on the table. His Anglo-American accent was precise, emotionless. Smith tensed, shrinking back. "I don't have money for lawsuits anymore. If you're from the bank or from Brooke, then get lost." The lawyer gave a thin smile and slid a thick folder towards Smith. "On the contrary, my client is very impressed with the algorithm, the ghost, that you are developing. We want to invest." Smith frowned and picked up the folder. It was a partnership agreement. Party A was listed as Blue Jay LLC, a completely unfamiliar name that clearly looked like a shell company. "Blue Jay LLC is willing to inject," the lawyer said, pulling out a pre-signed check and placing it on the table. The number $150,000 appeared seductively. "In exchange, we take 40% equity." "40% is too high for a first round," Smith responded instinctively from years of professional habit. "And who is Blue Jay? I need to meet the investor." The lawyer's face hardened, his tone turning firm. "This is the most important clause, on page 5. The investor will be a silent partner. Their identity is strictly confidential. You are not allowed to ask questions or investigate the source of the funds. All communication goes through me. If you violate this, the capital will be withdrawn immediately." Smith looked at the check, then out the window where snow continued to fall. A large sum of money from an anonymous source, no questions allowed. In finance, this usually meant money laundering or organized crime. But Smith looked at his own gaunt reflection in the glass. What did he have left? His honor? Already gone. His morality? It had died with his marriage. Smith pulled a cheap ballpoint pen from his breast pocket. "I don't care if your client is God or the devil, as long as the money is real." He signed the document with a quick stroke. The lawyer nodded in satisfaction, slid the check toward Smith, and left as quickly as he had come, leaving Smith holding a ticket back into the game. 3 years passed, enough time to completely reshape the order of Wall Street. The initial $150,000 from the mystery fund had been turned by Smith into a nuclear weapon in the fintech industry. His company, Apex Systems, powered by the algorithm, the Ghost, swept through every exchange from the NYSE to NASDAQ. It predicted market movements faster than any expert, executed thousands of trades per second, and ruthlessly cut losses and locked in profits with machine-like precision. Forbes magazine put Smith back on its cover once again, but this time there was no friendly smile of the Midas King. The cover showed Smith with razor-sharp eyes beneath the bold headline, "The Ruthless Unicorn." His company's valuation had surpassed $1.2 billion. Smith had officially returned to the top 1% of America. But Smith had changed. He was no longer the man who dreamed of romantic yacht trips with his wife. He had become a cold, emotionless work machine. He moved his office to the 70th floor of the brand new Hudson Yards Tower, looking down over the entire city like a king ruling his kingdom. The work culture at Apex Systems was brutally harsh. Smith worked 18 hours a day and demanded the same of his employees. He would fire a department head without hesitation for arriving 5 minutes late to a meeting. "Business is war," Smith would declare coldly in board meetings. "There are no prisoners here, only winners and corpses." Despite his immense wealth, Smith lived like an ascetic monk inside his office. He bought no house, no car, had no relationships. On the glass wall opposite his desk were not expensive art pieces, but 6 large screens constantly displaying the stock movements of a single company, Titan Holdings, the conglomerate run by Brooke. Every dollar of profit Smith earned was stored in a massive war chest. Like a great white shark, he swam silently beneath the surface, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike with a fatal bite and devour the fattest prey of his life, Brooke. Judgment Day for Brooke arrived on a bleak Monday morning. As the stock market rang the opening bell, Smith gave the order to activate the full acquisition buy order. In less than 2 hours, through a network of shell companies, Smith swept up every available share of Titan Holdings, the conglomerate Brooke was running. By 11 a.m., the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, received a Schedule 13D filing announcing that Smith officially owned 51% of the shares, completing the most classic hostile takeover of the decade. Smith's office door burst open. Brooke stormed in, his face flushed red, sweat pouring down, with none of the arrogant composure he had possessed 3 years earlier. "Smith, you've lost your mind. What do you want? To swallow my company whole?" Smith sat with his back to the glass window, slowly taking a sip of black coffee, not even glancing at Brooke. "Correct your form of address," Smith replied calmly. "I am the chairman of the board now. And no, I'm not swallowing it. I'm simply taking back what you stole." "You're going to fire me?" Brooke asked, his voice trembling. He knew that if he was dismissed now, buried in debt, he would lose everything. Smith turned his chair around and smiled with a shark's grin. "Firing you would be too easy. No, Brooke. I'm demoting you to a low-level executive assistant. You'll sit at a small desk next to the restroom, and your daily job will be to make coffee for me. I want you to watch me run this company every single day." Leaving Brooke standing frozen in crushing humiliation, Smith pressed a button to summon the private investigator. A man in a long coat entered the room and placed a yellow envelope on the desk. "We've located Miss Ellen, sir." Smith opened the envelope. Inside were candid photos of Ellen. She looked thin and worn, lifting heavy boxes onto a delivery truck. "She's living in a Queens slum, in a semi-basement apartment. She's currently a seasonal employee for a catering service called Diamond Catering. Her pay is," the investigator reported. Smith looked at the photo of Ellen wiping sweat from her brow, a cold smirk forming on his lips. "Diamond, huh? Ironic. She left me chasing money, and now she's carrying trays for the rich." He picked up the intercom and called his secretary. "Prepare a merger celebration tonight at the Plaza Hotel, and listen carefully. Hire Diamond Catering for the service, request their highest tier package, and specifically designate an employee named Ellen to serve at my VIP table. I want her in the front row to watch this performance." Smith hung up the phone. The trap was set. Tonight, he would show Ellen just how expensive betrayal truly was. 7 p.m. The grand ballroom of the legendary Plaza Hotel blazed like daylight beneath Swarovski crystal chandeliers. This was where New York's elite gathered, financial tycoons, Hollywood stars, and powerful politicians. Smith entered the hall to thunderous applause. He wore a black tuxedo, custom-tailored in London, his presence radiating absolute power. In his hand was a glass of rare 1995 Chateau Margaux red wine. Standing beside him was Brooke, now hunched in the role of an assistant, clutching a briefcase and repeatedly bowing to people he had once looked down on. Smith smiled politely, shaking hands with partners, but his eyes continuously scanned the service staff, searching for his prey. And then he saw her. In the corner of the room, near the kitchen area, Ellen emerged carrying a heavy tray of drinks. She wore a baggy black server's uniform, completely out of place among the sea of luxurious evening gowns. Her once golden hair was hastily tied up, strands of gray hanging loose. Her face was unmade, hollow and pale under the warm lights. Smith narrowed his eyes, observing more closely. The hands that once glided across piano keys were now red, cracked, with calloused fingertips, the marks of grueling manual labor and constant exposure to cleaning chemicals. A surge of cruel satisfaction mixed with a sharp ache ran through Smith's spine. "Look at her," he told himself, taking a sip of wine to steady his emotions. "This is the end for someone who chose to betray me. She traded love for money and ended up in poverty. Fair enough." Ellen moved with difficulty through the dense crowd, carefully avoiding contact with the distinguished guests. Her head was bowed low, as if trying to shrink herself into invisibility. She did not know that the host of this lavish party had prepared a private stage just for her, where she would be the lead actress in a tragedy of humiliation. Smith signaled to Brooke. Brooke understood immediately and hurried over to whisper to the service manager. The manager nodded at once, pointed toward the central VIP table where Smith was seated, and ordered Ellen to bring the wine there. Smith sat down in a velvet armchair, crossing his legs, his gaze sharp as a blade, waiting for the moment Ellen would step in front of him. Ellen walked toward the VIP table, her legs heavy as if weighted with lead. As she drew closer, she shuddered slightly when she realized the man seated at the center was none other than Smith. His transformation overwhelmed her, cold, razor-sharp, and radiating danger. "Sir, here is your wine," Ellen said softly, struggling to keep her voice steady as she set the bottle down, her eyes fixed on the tips of her shoes to avoid his gaze. Smith did not lift his glass right away. He leaned back in his chair, staring at his ex-wife with a mocking half-smile. "Hey, waitress," Smith said loudly enough for nearby tables to turn and look. "Are you sure this bottle is worth—" Ellen bit her lip, her hands trembling violently. "Sir, this is authentic Chateau Margaux 1995. Smith suddenly stood up, holding a full glass of wine. "Let's see." Instead of raising it to his lips, Smith casually tipped the glass upside down. The dark red liquid poured all over Ellen's pristine white uniform shirt. The red wine spread across her chest like a large bleeding wound. Crash! Smith let the crystal glass drop to the floor where it shattered. The piercing sound made the jazz band stop instantly. The entire ballroom fell silent, hundreds of eyes turning toward them. Smith showed no remorse. He pulled out a handkerchief, wiped the wine splashed on his hand, and then spoke loudly to the stunned crowd. "Oh, sorry about that. My hand slipped. But what's a little stain compared to the stain you left on my life?" He stepped away from the table and circled Ellen like a predator, his voice echoing through the grand hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ellen. When I went bankrupt and was framed, she was the first to run. She kicked me to the curb to chase that rich man Brooke over there." Smith pointed at Brooke, who stood hunched in the corner. Smith leaned close to Ellen's ear, but spoke loud enough for the whole world to hear. "So what now, Ellen? You left me for money, got dumped by him, and now you're serving drinks for the very husband you once despised. What do we call this in America? Oh, yes, karma." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Disdainful, mocking stares stabbed at Ellen like knives. She stood frozen amid spilled wine and broken glass, tears welling up, but she forced them back, enduring the ultimate humiliation. In the face of Smith's public humiliation, Ellen did not scream, did not defend herself, and did not run away. She slowly knelt down on the cold marble floor right at the feet of her former husband, who stood towering like a god of judgment. Her rough hands reached for a white linen napkin and began to wipe up the spilled red wine and pick up the sharp shards of broken glass. A small piece cut into her finger, fresh blood seeping out and mixing with the wine, yet Ellen seemed to feel no physical pain anymore. "I'm sorry, sir," Ellen whispered, her voice trembling but still maintaining the professionalism of a service worker. "I'll clean it up immediately. Please don't be angry." Smith looked down at the top of her head, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction mixed with emptiness. At that moment, Brooke, the diligent assistant, saw a golden opportunity to curry favor with his new boss. He pushed through the crowd and stood beside Smith. Brooke looked at Ellen kneeling on the floor with utter contempt, then turned to Smith with a mocking grin. "Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely right. This woman is the embodiment of bad luck. Don't you remember, the moment she entered your life, you fell. The moment she ran to cling to me, my company was taken over by you." He bent down, leaned close to Ellen's face, and spat out viciously. "Ellen, do you really think I ever loved you? Don't be delusional. A woman who abandons her husband in hard times just to chase money. I toyed with you for a few days and then kicked you to the curb. Look at you now. Pathetic. You're dirtying the floor of a five-star hotel." Ellen paused for a brief second. She looked up at Brooke. In her eyes there was no pleading, only a heartbreaking resignation. She knew the truth, but she had sworn to remain silent to protect Smith from the law. She pressed her lips together, lowered her head again, and continued wiping the floor, swallowing every cruel lie in silence. Soft giggles rose from the surrounding elite crowd. They whispered, pointed, and treated it as entertaining spectacle in an otherwise dull party. Not a single person stepped forward to defend the woman kneeling there. The coldness of New York's upper society enveloped Ellen's small figure, leaving her utterly alone and pitiable beyond words. Watching his ex-wife kneeling on the floor, enduring Brooke's humiliation, Smith felt a violent wave surge inside his chest. That feeling should have been the sweet taste of victory, yet strangely, it carried the bitter flavor of ashes. Ellen's silent submission only drove him further into madness. He wanted her to fight back, to scream, or at the very least to admit her regret for abandoning him. Unable to endure the scene for even one more second, Smith decided to deliver the final blow. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thick stack of cash he had withdrawn from the bank that afternoon to tip the band. It was $10,000 in cash, all crisp $100 bills bearing the face of Benjamin Franklin. "Enough!" Smith shouted, making Brooke flinch and step back. Smith stepped closer to Ellen, holding the stack of money high. The chandelier lights reflected off the bank's ceiling band. "You want money, don't you?" Smith sneered. "Your whole life, all you've ever craved is this green paper. You left me because I didn't have it, and you clung to that bastard because he did." Smith swung his arm and hurled the entire stack of cash straight into Ellen's face. Rip! The money band snapped apart. Hundreds of dollar bills fluttered through the air like a rain of green paper, landing on Ellen's hair, her shoulders, and covering the pool of red wine on the floor. The scene was both magnificent and horrifying in its cruelty. "Take it and get out of my sight right now," Smith roared, his voice breaking with emotion. Consider this charity. Consider it severance pay for what you call our cheap little marriage. Never let me see your face in New York again." The entire ballroom held its breath. Some guests turned away, unable to keep watching. Ellen slowly stopped wiping the floor. She did not bend down to pick up the money as Smith had expected. Instead, she gradually stood upright. She brushed the bills off her shoulders as if brushing away dirt. For the first time that night, Ellen lifted her head and looked straight into Smith's eyes. There was no longer fear, no servile submission of a service worker. There was no anger, no hatred either. Only an overwhelming disappointment and a deep, quiet pity. That look pierced through Smith's glamorous billionaire armor and struck the dying remnant of humanity inside him. She looked at him as if he were a lost child, a man who was the richest in the world in money, yet the poorest in soul. Her silence at that moment spoke louder than every insult he had just hurled at her. The atmosphere in the ballroom was stretched tight like a drawn bowstring. Smith, unable to endure Ellen's pitying gaze, turned to order security to drag her out. "Security! Get her the hell—" "Wait!" A sharp voice rang out from the stage, cutting Smith off mid-sentence. The microphone screeched with piercing feedback, forcing several guests to cover their ears. Arthur Penhalloden, the elderly lawyer of the mysterious investment fund, the man who had remained in the shadows for the past 3 years, stood at the podium, gripping the microphone tightly. Smith frowned. "Attorney Penhalloden, what the hell are you doing? This is a private party." The old lawyer stepped down the stairs, his stern gaze locking onto Smith, then sliding toward Brooks standing beside him. "Mr. Smith," he said gravely, "before you expel this woman, there is something from the sealed secure archive of Blue Jay LLC that you and everyone here need to hear. It has been locked away for 5 years and was authorized to be opened only under this exact emergency." Without waiting for Smith's response, the lawyer nodded to the sound technician. A crackling audio recording began playing through the Plaza Hotel's powerful speaker system. The entire ballroom fell dead silent. Recording begins. The sound of rain pounding. A door slamming shut. Man's voice, cold, arrogant. "Listen carefully, Ellen. I framed Smith down to the last millimeter. The FBI already has fake evidence in their hands. If you keep clinging to him, I'll submit it. He'll rot in federal prison for at least 20 years for money laundering." Murmurs ripple through the ballroom. Smith freezes. It is Brooks' voice, unmistakable. Woman's voice, panicked, crying. "Brooke, he's your best friend. Why are you doing this? Please, I beg you, spare him." Brooks' voice. "I hate that arrogant look on his face. Listen, I'm giving you a choice. Sign these divorce papers right now. You leave tonight. You say the cruelest words possible so he'll hate you, so he won't miss you anymore." Ellen's voice, trembling. "If I do that, you'll destroy the evidence?" Brooks' voice. "I promise. If you become the traitor, I'll only have him fired. He'll keep his life and his freedom. But if you breathe a word about this deal, I'll kill him in prison." Ellen's voice, sobbing in despair. "All right, I'll leave. I'll play the traitor. Please, let him live." Recording ends. The sound cut off abruptly, leaving a terrifying silence engulfing the entire ballroom. Smith stood frozen, as if struck by lightning. The blood in his veins seemed to turn to ice. Every word of the recording landed like a sledgehammer, shattering the wall of hatred he had spent 5 years building. He turned to look at Ellen. She was still standing there, amid the scattered money and spilled wine, her frail shoulders trembling violently as horrific memories surged back. She had not left him for money. She had torn her own heart apart to buy his freedom. Brooks' face drained of all color. He tried to quietly step backward and flee, but two massive security guards immediately blocked the exit. At that moment, he realized his mask had completely shattered in front of the most powerful witnesses in New York. Smith staggered, gripping the edge of the table to keep himself from collapsing. He turned to look at Ellen, his voice breaking, still clinging desperately to the last shred of reason. But wait! I saw you on TV with him. You were living in luxury with him all this time, weren't you? The money. Where did the money come from for you to invest in me? Attorney Penhaligon shook his head, his eyes filled with reproach as he looked at Smith. Mr. Smith, you are a financial genius, but you are painfully blind when it comes to people. The images you saw in the media were nothing more than a short-lived performance, staged so Brooke could keep his promise not to send you to prison. Right after ensuring your safety, Miss Ellen left him. She did not take a single dollar from Brooke. She left with literally nothing but the clothes on her back. The lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out an old, worn file, holding it up for everyone to see. They were notarized real estate transaction documents bearing the official seal of the United Kingdom. That year, when not a single bank in America was willing to even look at you, who do you think injected the capital? Smith froze, his breath caught in his throat. You mean, yes, Penhaligon declared firmly. The Blue Jay Fund is Ellen herself. To obtain that money, she sold the last and most precious asset she owned, a 300-year-old ancestral house she inherited from her mother, located in the outskirts of London. She sold it outright at a rock-bottom price just to raise enough cash in time for you to rent servers. The lawyer pointed toward Ellen, the small woman still standing silently amid the scattered bills. While you sat in an air-conditioned office in Hudson Yards managing billions of capital flows, your largest investor, Ellen, was living in a damp basement room in Queens, paying $500 a month in rent. She worked 16 hours a day, cleaning in the mornings, washing dishes in the afternoons, serving at banquets at night, just to earn enough to survive day by day. Penhaligon stepped closer to Smith, his voice dropping, but drilling straight into his soul. I suggested many times that she withdraw a portion of the profits to live a better life. She always refused. She said, let compound interest do the work. Smith needs every single dollar to fight the world. You see, Mr. Smith, you just threw money in the face of the only person who starved so that you could be fed. Smith looked down at the floor. The $100 bills he had just hurled at Ellen now looked like nothing more than worthless scraps of paper. He had used the very money Ellen sacrificed her entire life to build and flung it back at her dignity. That truth was more brutal than any punishment. While Smith was drowning in overwhelming remorse, Brooks suddenly burst into manic laughter. He knew his reputation was destroyed, but the survival instinct of a seasoned Wall Street fox drove him to cling to one final lifeline. Fine! What a touching performance, Brooks shouted, pointing at Smith. But don't forget, I still hold 20% of Titan Holdings shares, and more importantly, I control all the security codes of the old system. If you fire me, I'll activate the poison pill. The entire corporation will collapse. He turned to the crowd, trying desperately to reclaim a shred of authority. No one has the right to kick me out. I'm a strategic shareholder. Shut up, Brooke, Attorney Penhaligon cut in coldly. He pulled out a legal document stamped with a bright red seal and held it high. Mr. Brooke, and Mr. Smith as well, it seems both of you were too busy making money to read carefully Clause 18, Section B of the original investment trust agreement that Mr. Smith signed with the Blue Jay Fund. Smith looked up, his bloodshot eyes filled with confusion. What clause? The lawyer adjusted his glasses and read every word clearly and deliberately. According to the contract, if the Blue Jay Fund does not withdraw any profits for 5 consecutive years, then all preferred shares shall automatically convert into Class A voting shares at a ratio of 1 to 2. The entire ballroom erupted in shock. Everyone with financial knowledge understood exactly what this meant. It was a perfect checkmate. Penhaligon closed the file and turned to Smith, his gaze filled with pity. That means, as of midnight last night, exactly 5 years since the contract was signed, the Blue Jay Fund now holds. The air in the room seemed to freeze. All eyes slowly turned toward the small woman standing amid the chaos. Attorney Penhaligon straightened his tie and walked up to Ellen. He bowed at a 45-degree angle, a gesture of absolute respect he had once not shown Smith. Madam Chairwoman, you are now the legal owner of this entire empire. Do you have any instructions regarding senior personnel? At that moment, Smith's world completely collapsed. The woman he had just humiliated as a server, the woman he had thrown money at like a beggar, was in fact his true boss. He was nothing more than an arrogant hired hand, living and working on her silent sacrifice and unseen power. Brooke's mouth hung, his limbs trembling uncontrollably. He realized he had just humiliated the most powerful woman in the room. Ellen stood there, her uniform stained with wine and dirt, yet none of it could conceal her innate authority. She needed no crown, because sacrifice itself was the most radiant crown of all. She glanced briefly at Brooke, then stopped on Smith, her eyes calm as she awaited the final judgment. The silence suffocating the ballroom was broken by Ellen's voice. She needed no microphone. Her voice carried clearly, filled with the authority of one who held absolute power. "Attorney Penhaligon," Ellen commanded, her eyes still fixed on Brooke. "Transfer this extortion recording to the FBI immediately and notify security. Fire Brooke effective immediately. Ban him for life from entering any building owned by the corporation." "Yes, Madam Chairwoman," Penhaligon nodded. 2 massive security guards instantly stepped forward and seized Brooke. "Let me go! I'm the vice chairman! You can't do this!" Brooke screamed in despair as he was dragged away, his cries fading behind the heavy oak doors. Justice had been delivered, swift, ruthless, and unmistakably American. When the enemy was gone, Ellen turned back to Smith. The arrogant man, the self-proclaimed King Midas of Wall Street, was now collapsing onto the cold marble floor. Smith cried. Tears of remorse streamed down his hardened face, dripping onto the $100 bills he had thrown. He had conquered the world, yet lost himself. He had trampled the only person who valued his life more than her own. "Ellen," Smith sobbed, his voice shattered. He dared not touch her, only bowed his head before the worn fabric shoes of his ex-wife. "I was wrong. I'm a bastard. I let money blind me. Please, punish me. Fire me the way I fired you." Ellen did not answer immediately. She slowly bent down. The entire ballroom held its breath. Smith closed his eyes, bracing himself for a slap or a final insult. But no. Ellen's rough, calloused hands gently picked up the scattered bills from the floor. She stacked them neatly, then slipped the bundle into the breast pocket of the expensive tuxedo Smith was wearing. She placed her hand on his cheek, forcing him to look up at her. "Smith, stand up," she said softly yet firmly. Smith rose, trembling, his tear-filled eyes staring at her like a condemned man seeing heaven's light. Ellen smiled, a sad, forgiving smile. "I didn't invest in you for this day, the day you'd become a ruthless billionaire throwing money in your ex-wife's face. I invested in you," her voice caught, "because I believed in the heart of the young man who once carried me 5 miles through a snowstorm just because my heel broke. That man was poor, but rich in dignity and love." She withdrew her hand and stepped back. "But it seems that investment has failed. The man standing before me now, I don't recognize him." With that, Ellen turned and walked decisively toward the main doors, leaving behind the glittering party, leaving behind the chairwoman's power she had just been given. Smith stood frozen. Her words hit him like icy water, waking him completely. He looked down at the money in his pocket, then at her small, lonely figure fading away. No, he could not lose her again. Smith ripped off his $1 million suit jacket and ran, knocking over chairs in his path. "Ellen, wait!" He caught up to her at the revolving doors of the Plaza Hotel. Outside, heavy snow was falling, blanketing New York City in white. Ellen stood shivering in her thin uniform against the biting cold. Smith rushed forward and draped his warm jacket over her shoulders, covering the stained service outfit. He said nothing, only gripped her freezing hand tightly. Ellen paused and looked up at him. In Smith's eyes now there was no calculation of the marketplace, only sincere remorse and the deep love of the young man she once knew. "Give me one chance to reinvest in this," Smith whispered, his breath turning to white mist in the winter night. "Not as a CEO, but as your Smith." Ellen looked at him for a long moment, then gently nodded and squeezed his hand. Hand in hand, they walked into the snowstorm, leaving behind the lavish gala, leaving behind schemes and deception. Their silhouettes faded into the New York night. But this time, they were no longer alone.